Hey everyone, my name is Jacob Reed, and today we're going to be talking about This Is Us, Season 5, Episodes 1 and 2. Um, so these were the first episodes in 7 months, so everybody knows a lot happened since then. So they referenced both COVID and racism. So we're living the early months of the pandemic, as well as police brutality and the riots that followed it. Now, I don't know. I'm all for touching in real life events, but I don't know. I like to watch myself for escapism sometimes. I come to TV to escape the hellhole that was 2020, and now they're just rehashing it all. But besides that, it was a really good season for me. I loved how there weren't any commercials for the first half hour, but of course they had to make up for it by having a commercial break every 5 minutes after that. So I'm going to start off by going character by character and saying my reactions to each of their plot lines. So starting off, we have Jack in the 1970s when Kate and Kevin were born, when Rebecca goes into labor. So this is yet another episode where Rebecca gives birth. And personally, I think they do this too much, but in this episode, we get more character development for Jack, like he calls his father and stuff. I like Jack saying that he'd shave if Rebecca asked him to, and she said she never want him to see in a mustache, which is funny because, well, later we do see Jack in a mustache, but also that's how we tell which time period we're in, by the evolution of Jack's hair. When Jack thinks that Rebecca's gonna lose the babies, he goes to the chapel and tells God that take me if you want, but let Rebecca and the children live, don't you dare. And then he dies 16 years later. So I guess God listened to him. Maybe he shouldn't have added that "Don't you dare" part at the end. I feel like that kind of messed things up. It's like he was challenging God, and God just said "fuck you" and he killed him. And now moving on to the William scenes, which took place at the exact same time as the Jack scene. So we get to see Randall's birth and um, what happened to the mother. So first off, I want to say that the young William actor looks so much like the old one that I almost thought he was for a minute. This Is Us does a really good job at casting the younger actors, and especially William. He looks so good at like the actor who plays him. Looks so similar to Ron Cephas Jones. I think that's his name. So it was really sad to see William's girlfriend stop doing heroin when she was pregnant, only to immediately do it again after giving birth and she overdoses. Now, William gives her the heroin once he asks for it, which means that he was partially responsible for her death, and he blames himself. Well, her overdose, and he blames himself. But I don't think that's true because she would have taken it eventually, even if he didn't give it to her. She would have taken it eventually. That's what addicts do. Like, if you say no, that's just get it from another source. But William's girlfriend tells him that if she was gonna die, then he would promise to make Randall give him Randall a family. So I guess that influences William to drop him off at the fire station. But he goes to visit him at the hospital, and he runs into Jack in the chapel. Now I see this as a symbolic passing of the torch, kind of like William's passing off Randall to Jack. So I thought that's kind of sweet, but sad at the same time. And at the end of the episode, we find out that Randall's mom didn't die from overdose, that she's still alive, which raises a couple questions to me, like, how come she never went to William and told him that she's alive? And how come the EMTs didn't try to contact William? How come the police never came to arrest William at his apartment later? Like, he didn't move, he didn't go on a run. I don't know. I mean, it's a good twist, but I think it needs some answers. What happened to her? Does she have brain damage from her overdose and she can't remember things? Or is she ashamed because she doesn't want Randall to meet his mother who's an addict? She'd be ashamed to be his mother, so she left? I don't know. I'm hoping I mean, we probably will find this out in a couple episodes, but I need answers, Dan. Now, moving on to the present timeline, I'm going to start off with Rebecca. First off, I have to say that Randall Moore Mandy Moore plays it so well as an old woman. The way she moves and gets out of bed is so accurate to how elderly women get out of bed. I don't know, the whole movement is so good and her facial expressions fantastic. So she's been staying with Miguel at the family cabin for ever since COVID started. But her dementia is worsening, and I was thinking like her kids are still not over their dad's death, and he died like 25 years ago. So when Rebecca dies, it's gonna completely destroy them. These kids can't handle this sort of stuff, and I'm kind of worried about them. Uh, so it was weird because well, last season they showed what's gonna happen on this episode when Rebecca leaves the house, but she gets lost at the Chinese restaurant in the grocery store. But it's just a huge plot hole because now nobody's wearing masks, and they retroactively fitted that into a COVID timeline. Like I know they filmed these things last year, but it's just a huge plot hole. When the police bring her home, they're not wearing masks. The waitress isn't wearing masks. The lady at the cash register isn't wearing any masks. It's just a huge plot hole. I don't know. I wish they'd address that. Um, but I'm glad we get more screen time with Miguel because he is a fantastic husband of Rebecca. I'm really glad that she has somebody like him in her life. I kind of hope we get to see a flashback later in the season of him and Rebecca falling in love because that's one of the eras we haven't really touched on much with This Is Us. So Rebecca has allergic reactions to poison ivy, but we find out that it's mostly from the medications she's taking mixing. Her Alzheimer medication is mixing with the poison ivy medication. So it gave her a bad reaction to the poison ivy. When Randall visits Rebecca, she asks him if Beth and the kids are with him, and he says no. But then at the end of the scene, she says the exact same thing, and he still responds no, because he forgot she asked it the first time. Now, my grandma had dementia, and she used to do that all the time. So I think that's a really realistic way of This Is Us showing that whole dementia is getting worse. And Randall's slowly but sadly accepting it, which, it's going to be a hard season to watch if Rebecca's going to end up like that. Now, moving on to Randall. Oh, Randall, 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 how much I dislike you. So Randall's in politics, so it would make sense for them to talk about politics. But I personally just wish they'd address the violence concerning these protests more and kind of address that as well. Now, Malik and Randall talk about racism and how Randall never had anybody to talk to about that when he was little, and that was a very nice and touching scene. But Malik wears a mask when he's walking down the street by himself. Nobody's around him when he's walking down the street wearing his mask. And he takes it off before he talks to Randall, a guy he doesn't live with. So, does he care about COVID or doesn't he? That's just a that's just something I noticed. It doesn't make that much sense. Um, and of course, Randall's kids are back, and Annie actually had lines this time. She has more screen time in this episode than all of last season combined. It's insane. It's like I forgot he had three daughters. It's insane. Now it's sad that Randall didn't feel comfortable talking to his dad about the police brutality killings back in the 90s. And I'm just gonna say I understand Randall's frustration and his defensiveness to his mother, like dealing with Rebecca. But I feel like how he's about to handle the situation with Rebecca isn't the best way to go about it because he's being way too pussy when he was screaming at Miguel and when Miguel was talking on the phone at the doctor, and he's been too aggressive and defensive in his weird way of loving his mother. I don't know. I think it's good that he's in therapy. Um, but they're doing a really good job this episode of making Randall so utterly unlikable. Like, I think people are forgetting all the terrible things Randall's done in the past, and he never made amends for any of them. He manipulated Rebecca into going into that clinical trial. He blamed Kevin for not being around when Jack died. He ghosted his family for months. And then he just unleashes all of his pent up, back up trauma onto them without considering the pain that he's caused all of them. Now, I mean, he's entitled to have that conversation, but now is not the time or place. You've treated your family horribly this past year. Don't make them feel sorry for you. Kate apologizes for racism, but Randall said she should have been sorry when the other black people stopped at police years ago. And Randall wishes he could have talked to his family about racism, and he's mad at them for that. But I don't blame them because they haven't raised they're all white people. They don't know how to talk about racism, and I don't think he should be mad at them for that. They're ignorant, but they're not apathetic. They care about him a lot, and I just think if teenage Randall opened up to him, then Jack would be happy to talk to him about it. So Randall's blaming this on his family, and while it's partly their fault, it's also his. I feel like he should have taken responsibility for that. He could have said, "Dad, I want to talk about racism." Um, I know that's a controversial opinion, but Randall's a teenager. He could have told his dad. His dad and his mom are so good that he could have trusted him with that. He's trusted his parents before. I don't know why he couldn't do that now. So Randall, at the end of the episode, he leaves his white therapist for his black therapist. And that one, it actually makes sense for me. Because he needs more black people in his life to give him advice on how to be black and how to confront racism. And it was nice when he ended with his white therapist that he assured her that it wasn't her fault. And she completely understood. But all in all, I'm not really liking Randall that much. He was totally out of line to Kate. She didn't deserve that. She was trying to be a nice sister to him. So, Kate and Toby are quarantining by themselves with their son Jack, and when they meet, and Kevin and Randall are still being angsty to each other, Kate says, "The world is literally on fire. Fix it." Of course, he's referencing California, but more importantly, she says fix it in a stern voice, similar to how Rebecca said it to Jack when he had a drinking problem. So I could definitely tell that she's her mother's daughter. Hopefully she doesn't get the dementia, but that's another story. Um, but Kate and Toby have been applying for adoption ever since COVID started, and they finally get approved. And that is just a great birthday present for Kate, because her and Toby have wanted another kid for a while now, and it's so happy that she gets to do that through adoption. Um, I like when Rebecca was like, "Well, I just took Randall home the day he was born," and Kate was like, "It's 40 years ago, Mom. It's harder now." And it makes sense that it's harder now because you got to find out that the parents that are adopting are good people. It takes a while. But of course, Kate and Toby are great people, so there was no issue. So Miguel, probably the most underrated character on the show, finally gets some good scenes. He finally gets a storyline this episode. Toby talks to Miguel. They're talking about Rebecca and her dementia, and I like how Toby calls Miguel Miggs. And Miguel said he's worried because Rebecca's gonna have dementia and she's gonna slowly wither away, and she's gonna have to take her dementia one day at a time. Same way when Toby started off taking his medication, he felt like it was indefinite and he always had to do that. But now he just thinks he has to do it one day at a time. So that's the advice he gives Miguel. It's a really short but touching scene, and I like Toby and Miguel. They're both really supportive husbands and nice people themselves. And now for Kevin and Madison. She's pregnant with his baby, of course, and Kevin decides to quarantine with her. And over the months, he starts to fall in love with her. Now I wish they could have develop that over a few more episodes because it seems too fast. But for them, it was multiple months. So I guess it makes sense. C trips and falls and C thinks he loses her baby. Now, I would have been worried about Madison losing her babies if we haven't already seen them in the future. Like, we know they're going to be fine, so what's... I don't get the tension there. But in the heat of the moment, Kevin proposes to Madison, but she declines at first because, like I said, it was in the heat of the moment. But he tells her he was serious, so they actually get married. When Kevin and Randall meet again, Kevin acts really defensive, and he automatically defends himself because he thinks that Randall's gonna blame him for the argument. And that just shows how insecure Kevin is, and also how bad of a brother Randall's been to him lately. Now I know that Kevin was a bad brother to Randall growing up, but now I think it's reversed. Now moving on to Beth. Just kidding. She didn't have any storylines this episode, except for that one speech at the end. I don't know. I just hope we get more screen time with Beth, because she's actually my favorite character. And I know we have some episodes about her, but I just wish we'd spend more time with her. So here are my overall observations on this premiere. There's lots of extreme close-ups when main characters are having their monologues, notably Jack, Rebecca, and Madison. It's a nice side profile when they're speaking. It kind of elevates their facial expressions and what they're saying. But people in the show have been doing monologues since the beginning. And they're always doing these strange, awkward monologues with random people they come in contact with. Which makes me wonder what those guys are thinking, how awkward it must be for these background characters to be subjected to these awkward monologues. What are they thinking? I wonder if after the show ends, some fan is gonna re-edit the entire series in chronological order, kind of like somebody did for Lost years ago. That would be pretty cool, but also time-consuming, so I feel bad for that guy. And there's also a theme throughout this episode of birth and death. And those births, when it comes to Rebecca's kids, she gives birth to her kids, Madison being pregnant, and William's girlfriend giving birth to Randall. But there's also deaths when it comes to William's girlfriend, who we think dies, Rebecca's upcoming death, foreshadowed with her dementia, and Madison being afraid that her babies are going to die, and Jack being afraid that Rebecca's babies are going to die. That's just something I noticed, and I think that's the theme of this episode. So overall, I did like this episode. I had some negative things to say about it, but, I mostly did enjoy it. So I'm going to give it a B+. Let me know in the comments what you think of this premiere, and what your predictions are for the rest of the season.